Hi, I'm Grady Cullen in the CapeCod.com News Center, and welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by a special guest who's running for state representative for Barnstable Dukes, Nantucket. Do you mind introducing yourself for our listeners?
Sure. My name is Thomas Moakley, and I'm a candidate for state representative in the Barnstable Dukes Nantucket District, which includes parts of Falmouth, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the town of Gosnold.
All right, awesome. Thank you for finding some time to come down to the studio and have this conversation in person with me today.
It's my pleasure, and may I just say that you have an incredible radio voice.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad I found the right place then, and yourself as well. So we're going to be diving into a whole bunch of topics related to everything that has anything to do with the Cape and Islands region, of course, today, since you're running for the district that covers a lot. But starting first, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about yourself. What made you decide that now is the time that you wanted to run, and what experience are you bringing to the table?
Well, it all comes down to a belief in public service, because it's awfully comfortable to just be a private individual, to, look at the headlines and say, oh my, that's a shame, and then go back to your life, go back to your job. But I look at those headlines, I look at the issues that are facing our region, and I see that those most important issues that face the Cape and Islands are also those that disproportionately impact young people. Things like the opioid epidemic, things like affordable housing, climate change, and those things that are disproportionately affecting our generation. So I want to do something about it. I want to join that next generation of leaders that's up there at the State House collaborating on solutions, because ultimately public service is all about what's possible. It's not about dangling these fears about what might happen if this invasive problem is going to come to your backyard. It's about what can we do to make the future better for ourselves and the future generation.
Mm-hmm. All right. As well, you have a lot of experience in law, so I wanted to just say, can you elaborate more on what your current position is, kind of what you do? I know that you probably can't run with that as as a major platform, but just from an education standpoint and what you've learned through your careers, do you mind elaborating more on being with the district attorney for Martha's Vineyard for Falmouth? Excuse me.
Sure. So up until I became a candidate for this office just last week, I was the prosecutor or the assistant district attorney responsible for all criminal cases on Martha's Vineyard, in the Martha's Vineyard Juvenile Court and the Edgartown District Court. And so in that role, I was handling cases from arraignment all the way through disposition, including jury trials, bench trials, motions, everything in between. And so what I brought to that role is a similar mindset that I want to bring to the role of state representative, which is open communication and an emphasis on integrity in public office. And so it was through that that I was able to earn the respect of both law enforcement on the island as well as the defense bar. And working with my boss, District Attorney Rob Galaboys, we've also laid the groundwork for the establishment of what's called a recovery court on Martha's Vineyard, which has never existed in Dukes County before. And what that does is it takes a holistic approach to public safety, addressing the needs of repeat offenders who have addiction problems, whether it's with drugs or alcohol, and it's a preventative measure in order to address their underlying needs as addicts, trying to connect them to the services that they need. And it takes the form of essentially a highly supervised period of probation, where they come into the court regularly. They're in front of the judge, they're in front of the prosecutor, their attorney, and then the other clients who are part of that recovery court program. And it's very informal. It's a conversation. How was your week? Was it a good week? Was it a bad week? And that way it gives everybody involved in the system, straight from the police all the way up through the judge, a background into what's going on in people's lives and the reasons why people might turn to crime in the first place, and in order to help turn people towards a more productive lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you're more in tune with some of the issues that are facing people just because of the fact that you've had these experiences with people who've had hard lives, fallen in with crime?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why people end up in those situations, and particularly when it comes to addiction, when it comes to mental health issues, we need to start thinking about the reasons that people end up in the court system and trying to prevent them from repeating their behavior, and hopefully setting them on the right track to, frequently judges will say, we hope we never see you here again. And that should always be the goal. In the case of violent crime, of course, we take into account the safety and the priorities of the victims. But particularly when it comes to people who have simple drug possession and who have addiction issues, I think we need to be looking at the ways that we address those underlying issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so, having been working there on the Vineyard, I've been commuting. I grew up in Falmouth, and I live there now. And so I've been taking the boats over every day. That's something that I've gotten used to. Before working for the DA's office, I went to Suffolk Law School in the evening program while working during the day at the Suffolk DA's office. And before that, I was at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. So,
All right. Bring a lot of, law experience to this role potentially if you were to win the seat. I want to segue into some of the biggest topics impacting the Cape and Islands region. We already kind of touched on the fact that you're taking the boats a lot as well. You're familiar with the unique transportation system of Cape Cod and the islands. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, if you were to win the seat, what are your thoughts on the transportation infrastructure of Cape Cod? We have some major projects, over $4 billion to potentially replace the Sagamore and Bourne bridges, as well as the Steamship Authority, which has come up against some hard challenges as of late related to IT having a technological debt, according to technological consultants, saying that they're going to have to get behind a new reservation program. They're also trying to upgrade their boats. So we have a lot of things going on in the Cape and Islands region related to transportation. Can you talk a little bit more about what your plans might be and what your focuses would be in that regard if you were to win the seat?
well, a lot of these issues are interconnected. I'm sure we'll talk about affordable housing a little later, but the importance of having effective transportation is directly tied to the issue of affordable housing too, because since there is not an ample supply of affordable housing in the area, a lot of our year-round workers and seasonal workers have to commute from far away, over the bridges, through the Steamship Authority, in some cases both, in order to get to work. So it's essential that the transportation system that we have here is not only up to date, but well-funded and has a plan for being adequate for future generations. And so as far as the bridges go, I think it's incredible news that came out this week regarding the federal money that's going to be coming towards it. That's not the total amount that's necessary to complete the project, but it goes a long way. You know, any and every funding source should be applied to doing it right, so we don't have to do it again before too long. As far as the steamship goes, I think the number one thing is that the islands' autonomy have to be respected, because the local leaders are the ones who know best about their own needs and about what's working well and about what's not working well. The Steamship Authority has IT issues that need to be addressed, which includes reservation systems, safety and efficiency items on the boats themselves, because these, what we're talking about, are very old vessels. You know, they've been updated to the extent that they're able to, but there's a long way to go. And so the autonomy of the islands needs to be respected there. And the state should support the Steamship Authority to the extent that it can, emphasizing a local leadership of the steamship itself. They also have staffing issues. You know, that there's a sort of missing middle, as there is in so many areas of public service, where they can get people at entry-level positions, but it's hard to maintain them. Massachusetts has been a leader in so many areas. You know, marriage equality, for example. The Marine Biological Laboratory and the Woods Hole Oceanographic are leaders in their industries, and right in my district. We could be a leader too in transportation, because we have such a unique area with the bridges, with the regional buses, with the steamship. And so I think that the problems that are facing our transportation sector now are ones that we can address in such a meaningful way that we could change ourselves from playing catch up to being a leader in that area. And it just requires elevating our experts, devoting the necessary funding to the projects, and being optimistic about the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, as well as part of your answer, you touched on affordable housing. That is one of the next major topics I wanted to tackle, especially for Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Both are considering more housing opportunities for some of their public servants, for town municipal employees, ways to kind of help some of the affordable housing issues for those islands. There's also, of course, problems on the Cape and Islands region, the Cape Cod region itself as well. Nantucket, most recently as well, over the summer, set record sale prices for real estate on Nantucket Harbor with, I believe, a $38 million home sale. And that was actually down from an asking price of about $54 million. So we're seeing very high real estate prices across the Cape and Islands region and a lot of people having to commute over the bridges. What are your thoughts on the state of affordable housing for the Cape and Islands? What are some of your thoughts about ways towns have been trying to address the issue? And do you have any plans yourself in terms of what you think needs to be done to help make this a more sustainable region?
Well, it all comes down to what kind of community do we want to be. And if we're not going to do anything about this issue, then we're going to become a community of retirees with small businesses that struggle to staff their own businesses, particularly in the summertime when our population swells so much. But affordable housing is not just a summer issue, it's a year-round issue. You're a young man yourself. I imagine when you came home back to the Cape, it probably wasn't the easiest thing for you to be able to find a place to live. It certainly is difficult even for assistant district attorneys coming down to the Cape who want to serve their communities to find a place to live. So if we're deciding that we want to be a plural community that has the resiliency in order to staff the businesses that we have and maintain the sort of quality of life that we have, then we have to afford the housing to the people that are going to be occupying those positions. So there's a number of different ways to look at it. The most basic thing is, how do we minimize the cost of each bed of affordable housing? And that comes into making smart planning decisions that include the realities of climate change going forward. It also includes looking at it from two different perspectives. On the one hand, on the Cape and Islands, particularly on the islands, there's not exactly ample open space for brand new development. So adding new housing stock is always a positive, and funding should be devoted, including transfer fees, to building new affordable housing. But we should also be thinking about local solutions for transforming existing housing stock from seasonal housing exclusively to year-round affordable housing stock. Because if you think about it, that we're going up 1 point every time that we create a new affordable housing bed. You can think about it like it changes 2 points every time we convert an existing exclusively seasonal room to something that's year-round and affordable.
All right. So you had mentioned climate change as well. So we are also doing all these developments with transportation, affordable housing, steamship authority. Everybody's also gearing up for potentially, hopefully, a more green future. As we're starting to see the effects of climate change as a coastal community, we have stronger storms and powerful surges and also potential for flooding in the area as well. As we're kind of trying to make our statewide plans of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, as well as some local plans, where do you think the Cape and Islands region falls? Do we need to be a leader? Do we have more to do? Do you think we're doing all right? Do you have any opinions on what we need to do moving forward to hit some of these goals? And do you think that you see yourself in the position of being able to help meet that if you were to win the seat?
We do have a lot more to do, and we do need to be a leader. We are the epitome of a coastal region. We're the Cape and Islands. And even just this week with the storm that we had on Monday, you can see the very real impacts that climate change is having on our communities. Surf Drive in Falmouth was flooded. The Tisbury Great Pond on the Vineyard was breached. The dunes on South Beach in Edgartown were totally washed away. Needs to be a two-pronged approach, because it's here, and it's here to stay, and it's going to get worse. And it's not just sea level rise. It's not just global warming. The storms are going to become more frequent and more intense. And so we need to be talking about resiliency as well as mitigation. So mitigation is talking about increasing our renewable portfolio, thinking about alternatives to fossil fuels in order to power our communities. And driving electric cars is an amazing step forward. Technology is only improving in that sector, but ultimately those cars get plugged in somewhere, and the power is coming from somewhere else. In Massachusetts, most of our power comes from natural gas. And so we have a long way to go towards increasing our renewable stocks across the state and across the Cape and Islands. So we also need to talk about the resiliency aspect, which means, projects moving forward as far as new building goes should take into account the current and expected impacts of climate change moving forward. In addition to building on land, something that we can also consider as far as coastal resiliency is building up our offshore banks in order to prevent storms from having as detrimental an erosion impact as they currently do. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We need to, again, rely on our experts. We have so many, even just in our area, who know what steps can be taken. All we need is the political willpower and the funding to make it happen. Again, no one could run for office without being optimistic about the future. And although this is an existential threat, it's something that we can handle if we come together and do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, as well, speaking of alternative forms of energy, Cape and Islands region in general is starting to become a major hub for offshore wind developments. We just saw recently that Park City Wind has been given draft air quality permit approval by the EPA, the U.S. The federal EPA for the development of their offshore wind. Construction would be approved with those permits. There's going to be a public comment period that's going to go through January 25th, I believe, for those two permits for those two different Park City Wind projects. But that's just one of several different offshore wind developments that is just off the coasts of Martha's Vineyard southbound. Is there any, do you think that there is enough communication currently? There have been some people who have voiced concerns about environmental impacts or impact on fisheries and whatnot, and then there's others that are very pro about it because of a potential alternative form of energy. Where do you stand on this? Do you think there's enough communication with local communities? Would you want to look into that yourself? Do you have comments that you want to add about the topic while we're on it?
I'm in favor of offshore wind. I think that, again, this is an area where we can be a leader. We've already seen a major influx of jobs to the region as a result of our own sort of local Green New Deal building those wind turbines in the first place. Obviously, we're still talking about power companies here, and if they're working on these major projects, then local leaders, local governments, and the state government need to have a say in how they're doing it, because ultimately we are talking about issues that impact people in a very real way, because you have the wind turbines themselves, but you have cables that are crisscrossing the seafloor and neighborhoods themselves. So I'm in favor of wind, absolutely, but local leaders need to be consulted as far as exactly the implementation of those.
All right. So we also are currently in a emergency declared by the state related to migration, to immigration. We have a lot of migrant families. We've capped out the shelter capacity of 7,500 families come the end of November, according to Governor Maura Healey. We are seeing several people housed in the Cape and Islands region, Joint Base Cape Cod, Bourne. We have Yarmouth, Harborside Suites Hotel is currently as well. And I believe that Martha's Vineyard is also having some sheltering potentials in addition to that. Where do you stand on how the state's relation to the local town municipalities is right now in terms of how the migration is being handled? Do you think there's enough communication? Do you think that there's enough money being brought back for the costs involving housing some of these migrants? Do you have recommendations for the state or for the municipalities being chosen as shelter locations? What are your thoughts on this issue?
A lot of it comes back to inaction on the federal level in Congress to actually come up with any sort of comprehensive immigration issue, because ultimately it's Congress that has the power under the Constitution in order to set policy related to immigration. So we're left in Massachusetts with essentially how do we deal with the people who are here and the people who are continuing to come here. Last year, Governor Ron DeSantis flew a plane full of migrants to Martha's Vineyard as a political stunt, using human beings to try to make a political statement, which I think is just an absolute shame. And I'm extremely proud of the way that the Vineyard and the Cape community responded to that, saying, we welcome them in. Because it's so easy to just think of migrants as people who are other. But ultimately, it's going to be people who are part of the community right along with us. And so at the state level, I think that we should do what we can, particularly for those who are seeking asylum, to bring them into the fold, to make them feel welcome here, and in order to allow them to become productive members of the community, paying taxes, having their kids enrolled in our school, and ultimately becoming a part of the fabric of our community.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that is some of the a lot of the major topics that we've covered. Pretty much the only thing we haven't hit quite yet is water quality. We talked about how we have issues with climate change, but specifically we're also starting to see chemical issues, PFAS, wastewater treatment, especially for the islands. Those are very closed systems. But for Cape Cod, we also just have the sole source aquifer. As we're starting to be a little bit more conscious about how we use our water resources, what do you think is going on at the state level and for towns? Do you think that we're doing enough currently, especially for PFAS remediation? I know that State Senator Julian Sear currently is pushing for legislation to ban the ban the chemical in consumer products, as well as try and get other funding for remediation. And then there's also septic issues with old septic systems creating nutrient pollution for local water quality. Where do you think we are in terms of that issue? And what are your goals if you were to get the seat on this?
It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. If we hand down an edict from Boston, the municipalities, I expect, will struggle with how to implement it, particularly when it's something that doesn't include a dollar sign after it, because it's going to be the municipalities that have to deal with these issues. But frequently when that happens, it's reactive. There's a major problem, and then all of a sudden we have to scramble, figure out where are we going to get the money, how are we going to bridge the gap between when we solve this problem with the water quality, with the septic systems. So it comes back to, as part of a Green New Deal, creating new buildings with standards that we expect can last 50, 100 years into the future in order to mitigate the issues going forward. Cities and towns need to be supported by the state government in order to address the needs that they currently have, so that towns don't go further into debt issuing bonds. So ultimately, trusting the local experts to show the state what they need, while the state is also able to make sure that responsive projects are able to meet statewide standards and hopefully move forward in a way that creates a lasting impact on those issues.
Mm-hmm. Now, really, I suppose this has always been the case, but do you think we're seeing now a turning point where people are seeing that the elected officials that they are voting into office are going to be making policies that are very, there's a longevity to it. We have a lot of things that we're focusing on, especially with PFAS, forever chemicals, climate change. Suddenly a lot of topics are things that are going to span multiple generations, maybe farther than people are used to. Do you think that that's going to be impacting a lot your campaign and other elected officials as part of the next stage, essentially?
Well, as I said earlier, I think politics is all about what's possible. And particularly as a Democrat, I believe in the amazing work that good government can do. And it's not good government to be making laws that you're not considering the impact that they may have 20, 30, 100 years in the future. So that is something that the legislatures should always do. And it's an interesting thing about the state legislature, because you're right that in the coming years, I think a lot of really important and lasting decisions are going to be made on Beacon Hill. But the state legislature and the state government in general is one of the hardest to monitor about what's actually happening. It's impossible to escape national politics. It gets shoved in your face pretty much all of the time. And it's also, for anyone who is engaged, it's easy to get in, not only just informed, but become a part of local politics. Because it's right there in your town meeting. Most of the towns in the district that I'm running have open town meeting, meaning anybody can go and participate. And the local newspapers do an incredible job at covering what's happening in the municipalities. But the state government is hovering there somewhere in the middle. And so I think it's important to bring more open government to the state, so then people can know the incredible power that state government has, in order to make sure that they know that their representatives are acting in their best interests.
Now, we're about coming up on time, but also speaking of accessibility, we've seen huge changes in the past just a few years alone related to digital equity and accessibility to internet broadband services. With the current climate of the Cape and Islands region, with its primary provider being Comcast, as well as some of the other things that we've been seeing with remote work and also remote schooling, do you think that we have some changes to make? Do you have some plans related to digital equity if you were to continue on and represent us at the State House?
I think Comcast needs some competition. I've always been in favor of a project that's going on in Falmouth called Falmouth Net, seeking to bring broadband connection to Falmouth. And I would be in favor of similar proposals on the islands as well, because I think competition in terms of how telecommunications are offered to our region will promote better efficiency, better response, particularly when there's issues related to storms, outages, and generally give people an option.
All right. Well, that is about all the time that we have, unfortunately. But is there anything else you want to highlight for our listeners that you feel we haven't covered just yet, or also places they can go to learn more about your campaign?
Sure. Well, I do have a website. It's thomasmoakley.com. That's ThomasMoakley.com. And so I would just add that, I want to be a legislator in the vein of Tip O'Neill, who knows that all politics is local and never forgot where he came from, and knows particularly the value of giving up credit. And that's the kind of legislator that I would want to be, willing to have someone else out there in front of the State House, in front of the news cameras, taking credit, as long as I feel confident that my district is well served by whatever piece of legislation it is. Giving up credit can be an incredible tool in a legislator's toolbox. And then I guess my director might not like if I didn't mention that outside of the law and politics, I'm also involved in community theater, which the Cape and Islands has an incredibly vibrant community theater community. And so I'll be in Falmouth Theater Guild's production of Clue come February.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you for letting us know. Perhaps we'll have someone back on again related to more theater. I just before we go, I got to throw you into the hot seat just one last time before we wrap up, and that's, what did you think of the tenure of Dylan Fernandez in the seat that you're currently now trying to seek? He's going on to try and seek out the state senator position. Do you have any thoughts on his tenure, things that you like, things that you wish he did differently? Is that informed what your plans are going forward?
I think Dylan did very well. Particularly, he ran for office as a 25-year-old, not much younger than I am now, and really showed through his tenure, along with his collaborations with Julian Sear, another young legislator, that age is not necessarily a determination of ability. And so I think they both have shown an energy, a passion for the communities, emphasizing the islands in particular. And I'm proud of the work that he did related to reproductive freedom here on the Cape, bringing the access to that sort of service to Cape Cod. I want to do similar things, particularly related to the lack of detox facilities on the islands. So I wish him all the best in his run for the state senate. It's going to be a very interesting race to watch.
All right, awesome. Thomas, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm Grady Collane, and this has been Sunday Journal.